My mother always said blood was thicker than water, but she forgot that money turns blood into poison. The funeral flowers hadn't even wilted when my mother and my uncle shoved a legal document into my face, demanding I sign away my rights to my grandmother's estate. When I refused, my mother looked me dead in the eye and said, "You were always a mistake, and mistakes don't inherit." They tried to physically lock me out of the law office on the day of the will reading. But the second the family attorney opened the heavy mahogany doors, my mother's arrogant smile vanished. The lawyer looked right past her, took one look at me, and said, "No, she stays. In fact, without her, this reading cannot legally begin." Welcome back to the channel. Before we dive into how my mother's greedy scheme completely backfired, make sure to comment below the city or country you're watching from. I love seeing how far stories reach. My name is Maya. I'm 29 years old, and up until 3 months ago, my family viewed me as little more than free labor. While my mother, Evelyn, and her younger brother, Uncle Richard, spent their lives chasing status, high-end cars, and empty prestige, I was the daughter who stayed behind. To Evelyn, I was always a disappointment. Unambitious because I chose to stay in our quiet hometown rather than climb some corporate ladder. But to my grandmother, Clara, I was her sanctuary. When Clara's health began to decline 5 years ago, Evelyn and Richard suddenly became very busy. They had vacations to take, business deals to manage, and endless excuses for why they couldn't visit her 50-acre farm. So, at 24, I packed up my life and moved in with my grandmother. I cooked her meals, managed her medications, ran the daily operations of her farm, and held her hand through the long, quiet nights when the pain kept her awake. I didn't do it for money. I did it because Clara was the only person in our family who loved without conditions. But to Evelyn and Richard, my devotion was a flaw to be exploited. They saw me as a live-in maid saving them the cost of a nursing home. The day Clara passed away, her hand grew cold in mine. Before the ambulance even arrived, the shift in my family was instant. The grief didn't soften them. It sharpened their greed. They didn't see a mother lost. They saw a jackpot waiting to be cashed out. The day of the wake, you would have thought my mother and Uncle Richard were attending a high-society networking event rather than bidding farewell to the woman who gave them life. While neighbors and old friends brought casseroles and shared fond memories of Clara, Evelyn and Richard hovered near the back of the parlor. They weren't wiping away tears. They were whispering in hushed, urgent tones, pointing at real estate listings on their phones and discreetly discussing property valuations. They were already spending money they hadn't yet inherited, evaluating buyer offers for Clara's historic farm as if it were nothing more than a piece of meat to be carved up. That evening, after the last guest had left, I went to my grandmother's study to find a quiet moment to grieve. I sat in her favorite armchair, surrounded by the scent of lavender and old paper. But the silence didn't last. The door swung open, and Evelyn marched in, followed closely by Richard. Without a word of comfort, my mother tossed a heavy manila folder onto Clara's mahogany desk, right next to a framed photo of my grandmother and me. "We need to handle this now, Maya," Evelyn said, her voice sharp and clinical. She slid a single white page toward me along with a pen. "It's a standard liability waiver and estate release. We need you to sign it immediately so Richard and I can speed up probate and put the property on the market next week." I picked up the document and began reading the fine print, paragraph after paragraph of dense legal jargon, but the intent was clear as day. By signing, I would be officially waiving any personal claim to Clara's estate, forfeiting any right to live on the farm, and agreeing to hand over all personal property within 48 hours. I set the pen down and looked up at her. "No, I'm not signing this." Evelyn's eyes narrowed into slits. The fake composure vanished, replaced by pure venom. "Don't be stupid, Maya. You're just a glorified caretaker who lived here rent-free. You were always a mistake, and mistakes don't inherit." Richard stepped forward, his jaw tight. "Sign the paper, Maya. Don't make this ugly." I said no, I replied, standing my ground. Evelyn snatched the paper off the desk, her face contorted with rage. "Fine. Have it your way. But when we go to the lawyer's office, Don't expect a single dime. We will make sure you walk away with nothing." 3 days later, the morning of the official will reading arrived. Rain drizzled over downtown as I walked toward the glass and steel skyscraper housing Vance and Associates, the prestigious law firm that had handled my grandmother's affairs for over 30 years. My heart hammered against my ribs with every step, but I forced my chin up. I wasn't going to let them intimidate me out of saying my final goodbyes to Clara's memory. When I stepped off the elevator on the 15th floor, Evelyn and Richard were already waiting in the plush leather chairs of the lobby. The moment Evelyn spotted me, her jaw clenched. She stood up, her high heels clicking loudly against the marble floor as she and Richard closed the distance, effectively blocking my path to the double oak doors of the main conference room. "What are you doing here, Maya?" Richard sneered, stepping into my personal space. "We told you this was a private family matter." Evelyn turned to the young receptionist behind the front desk, her voice dropping into an exaggerated, dramatic sob. "Miss, I'm so sorry about this. My daughter is severely emotionally unstable and distraught over my mother's passing. She's creating a scene and wasn't invited. Please call security if she tries to enter." Before I could even open my mouth to defend myself, Richard grabbed the brass handle of the conference room door. Evelyn stepped inside first, turned around, and put her hand against the heavy door, slowly pushing it shut directly in my face. "Wait in the parking lot where you belong," she whispered through the narrowing crack. "You don't exist in this family anymore." Before the door could click fully shut, a deep, commanding voice echoed from inside the room. "Is there a problem out here?" The door swung back open, revealing Mr. Vance. Clara's longtime attorney stood tall, dressed in a sharp three-piece suit, his silver hair neatly styled and his piercing blue eyes shifting between Evelyn, Richard, and me. Evelyn's cruel expression instantly melted back into her rehearsed, pathetic mask of grief. She stepped forward, placing a hand over her heart. "Oh, Mr. Vance, I am so sorry for the commotion. This is my daughter, Maya. As you can imagine, she's completely overwhelmed by sadness and isn't handling the loss well. She was just about to wait in the lobby while the actual family handles the legal proceedings." She gestured toward the receptionist, giving her a pointed look to call security. Mr. Vance didn't move. He looked at Evelyn's fake tears, then at Richard standing tall beside her, and finally his gaze landed on me. He didn't see an unstable trespasser. He saw the girl who had spent 5 long years sitting in hospital waiting rooms and managing Clara's affairs. His eyes softened slightly, but his jaw remained set in a hard, uncompromising line. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, looked right past my mother, and met my eyes. "No," Mr. Vance said, his voice cutting through the lobby like a blade. "She stays." Evelyn froze, her mouth slightly open. "Mr. Vance, surely you misunderstand. Maya is just a granddaughter who lived with my mother. She isn't a primary heir. This room is meant for the inner circle." "I assure you, Mrs. Vance, I misunderstand nothing," the lawyer replied coldly, stepping aside to hold the heavy oak door wide open. "In fact, without Maya present, this reading cannot legally begin. Take your seats." Evelyn and Richard sat down across the long mahogany conference table, their faces flushed with a mixture of rage and confusion. I pulled out a chair at the far end, refusing to look at them. Mr. Vance took a seat at the head of the table, opening a thick leather-bound folder while adjusting a pair of reading glasses. "We are here today for the formal reading of the last will and testament of Clara Elizabeth Miller," Mr. Vance began, his voice clear and resonant in the quiet room. "As you know, Clara possessed significant assets, including the 50-acre homestead valued at approximately $1.2 million, as well as several private investment portfolios." Evelyn leaned forward, a greedy, triumphant smirk flickering across her lips as she shot me a smug look. She and Richard were already mentally dividing the cash and signing the papers to sell the farm. "However," Mr. Vance continued, pausing to look over the top of his glasses at my mother and uncle, 2 years prior to her passing, your mother came to this office with a matter of grave concern. She presented official bank records revealing that unauthorized personal loans totaling over $200,000 had been taken out using her line of credit. The smug smirk vanished from Evelyn's face instantly. Richard shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair, a sudden bead of sweat forming along his hairline. Upon discovering this financial breach, Mr. Vance said, pulling out a fresh blue document from the file, Clara made the decision to completely restructure her entire estate. With my assistance, she established the Clara Miller Revocable Family Trust. All primary liquid accounts, as well as the deed to the 50-acre property, were officially transferred out of her personal name and placed inside this trust, rendering them entirely separate from traditional probate. Evelyn slammed her hand onto the mahogany table. What does that mean? What trust? I am her daughter. Richard is her son. We are her primary heirs. Mr. Vance ignored her outburst, calmly turning the page. Under the terms of the Clara Miller Revocable Trust, the entire 50-acre homestead, along with Clara's investment portfolio valued at $1.8 million, is to be placed under the sole authority of a designated trustee and primary beneficiary. He looked up, his gaze locking directly onto me. That person is Maya. The silence in the room was absolute. Evelyn looked as if she had been slapped, her face draining of all color. That's a mistake. She manipulated my mother. She's a thief. Silence, Mrs. Vance, Mr. Vance commanded, his voice sharp as steel. I am not finished. Your mother was very specific about what you and your brother were to receive. He pulled out two smaller, separate files and slid them across the glossy table toward my mother and uncle. Clara has bequeathed to you and Richard joint ownership of her commercial storage property on the east side of town. However, that property comes with a condition. Richard's hands shook as he opened his file. What condition? Included in those documents is a comprehensive forensic audit, Mr. Vance explained coldly. It details every single dollar siphoned from Clara's line of credit over the last decade. The total comes to exactly $250,000, debts incurred by the two of you. Clara's will explicitly states that ownership of the commercial lot is contingent upon you assuming full financial responsibility for those debts. Evelyn's eyes widened in sheer horror. And if we refuse? Mr. Vance leaned forward, his hands resting flat on the table. If you attempt to contest this trust or refuse the debt settlement, a specific clause automatically triggers an immediate transfer of all audit evidence to the county prosecutor's office for a formal investigation into financial elder abuse. Your mother left you a choice, Mrs. Vance. Take the debt or face a judge. Evelyn and Richard sat frozen in horror, trapped in a corner of their own making. With no legal standing to fight the trust and the terrifying threat of criminal exposure hanging over their heads, they had no choice. Within weeks, they were forced to put the commercial storage lot up for sale at a steep discount, scrambling just to pay off the $250,000 in siphoned debts before the prosecutor got involved. Stripped of their arrogance and bankrupt from years of living far beyond their means, my mother and uncle completely vanished from my life. Evelyn tried reaching out once, sending a tearful text message asking for a loan from the estate, but I simply blocked the number. As for me, I stayed right where I belonged. I turned my grandmother's 50-acre property into a thriving community sanctuary and organic farm, honoring Clara's memory every single day. Standing on the front porch as the sunset paints the fields in gold, I'm reminded that greed might win a few battles, but integrity always wins the war. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have cut ties completely or given them a second chance? Comment your thoughts below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories just like this one. Thank you for watching.